So why is it important for us to learn and understand the differences between the worldly system and the godly system? It is so that we stay grounded in God's system, and we can note when we are beginning to waver, when our attention is beginning to waver, when our emotions are beginning to flow towards the wrong system. We can really call both our attention, our emotion, our time, and our energy back and stand on the promise of God. Literally, like stand on the promise of God. So we see that the worldly systems are oftentimes motivated by fear, while godly systems are motivated by faith and our trust in God's sovereignty. I believe that God is the God of all things, and because God is the God of all things, everything I desire according to the will of God and what God has promised me shall come to pass. All I have to do is just wait and prepare myself to be a good custodian or steward, period. So we see that worldly systems oftentimes they use manipulation, and this is that's the method. So we now there's now a word of caution here for women being a part of the unit, how they need to understand that women wield a lot of influence and they wield a lot of energetic dominance, which is something we see when we look at aspects of God in the divine family. We see God wielding that dominance and influence. But as women being part of the family, remember that again, the family is actually a covenantal unit that is divinely instituted for the transition of faith. So if you're not rooted in faith and trust in God, you will find yourself leaning towards the worldly system and misusing or abusing your influence as a woman to manipulate during the family challenge. So, and what does that lead to? That oftentimes that manipulation results in things that are not good, because under the godly system, it's about your obedience and following God's path and our belief that God will do it, or the belief in God that God will do it. What this system oftentimes gives us instant gratification. When Sarai pushed Agai, promoted Agai, let me know the word push because I'm sure Agai was very happy to go. When Sarai promoted Agai from her maid to a mate and a likely surrogacy partner of her and her husband, you could see that instantly she got that gratification. Immediately Agai took in, and there's a child for the family. Now pressure. When we are going through now pressure, it's oftentimes a sign that we are operating under worldly system. So we need to switch to godly system immediately and live based off of patience and faith in God. Remember, while all of this is going, not to forget the earlier 3 points, which is number 1, keep having a good understanding. Number 2, communicate frequently, which includes praying to God. And number 3 is that you maintain a good relationship. So when you are living based off faith and patience in God, you are not really alone struggling under the weight of your challenges, because you are communicating with your partner and you guys have good understanding and you are maintaining a good relationship. I think that support really helps us not to feel overwhelmed by the challenge or whatever problem the family is currently going through. So another thing is that the consequence of us switching over to a worldly system is that it brings long-term pain, strife, and problems, and we would analyze why those strife and problems come in the next few points. Meanwhile, the godly system is actually based off making the impossible possible. Miracles begin to happen, unlike the worldly system that is about logic. And like I usually tell Prof, logic is sound until an unknown external force comes to kick off one of these foot of the stool, like many things that we've experienced. But when you follow the path of God, God is all knowing, all seeing. While you are sleeping, the enemy comes to tears. God knows the enemy is coming to sow tears. That's why I told you to harvest by 3 p.m. in the afternoon. If you didn't harvest by 3 p.m. in the afternoon, they've sown tears. So we see those dynamics where, because of the impossibility of a situation, only God can make miracles happen. So God makes the impossible possible, and that's why we need faith, because based on logic, the impossible can never become possible. Now that shifts us to how we now have to thrive in understanding that we need to surrender to God's will and hold on to the promises of God under godly system. And the last but most important thing that many of us don't actually pay attention to is to accept our human limitation. We are limited as humans, but God is not limited. So now, remember how I mentioned that oftentimes the world worldly system brings long-term pain, strife, or problems. That leads us to our fifth point of managing or even completely ending family challenges. Never invite a third party. Now we see that a third party breaks the unity bond of a family. Again, I will re-emphasize is a marriage and a family is based of permanence, is based of exclusivity, and is based of sacrificial acts. So when you invite a third party, you break the component of exclusivity in the family. In fact, you don't only break it, you may even ruin it. Now we see that with Sarah and Hagar. Immediately Hagar gets her promotion and she takes in, which is part of fulfilling her role as a surrogate partner. She becomes scornful, she becomes disrespectful to Sarah. And obviously this is a family where we have had we've been following Abraham from when he left the Ur of Chaldeans. Before he left the Ur of Chaldeans, when we learned genealogy, if they were a problematic couple, it would have been communicated there. If God could even be gisting us about what was happening in Pharaoh's inner court, his private house, I'm sure God would have been inspired whoever wrote that chapter to tell us that the couple are a strifeful couple. But they're not a strifeful couple, but the third party, immediately she comes in and fulfills a particular obligation of her promoted or elevated status, she begins to cause strife. So obviously, the child is not yet born, she's causing strife. We can already predict when the child is born, more strife would be caused. So that is a note for us to note. When we are operating in the worldly way, we can oftentimes distort the equilibrium of a place that already has unity. The third party begins to see you as a scornful equal. They were not an equal before. They were brought in to offer a solution, but they begin to not see you as an equal. They even scorn because of ego. Now, when that happens, we see that it makes them show negative traits. And negativity can strive in a place of unity, because unity is a bond based of positivity, understanding, communication, and a good relationship. So therefore, it's going to intensify the power struggles. It may intensify the unity, because where there's unity, oftentimes there's no power struggles. But this person with their power lost will introduce certain interests that will be detrimental to the unity of the family, bringing conflict and strife. And once this happens, you only have one solution to this particular act: kick them out. And that brings us to our sixth point, which is remove the external factor, third party, or worldly system. Oftentimes we go out into the world, let me use that phrase that we Christians love to use, to look for solution. So we need to come out of the world that we went into and go back into the kingdom of heaven to find our solution. So now when Sarah has seen that her whole house has almost scattered, because I don't know, this is maybe like a month or two after she's taken it, so it can't be up to 3 months, and Hagar has caused so much commotion. Sarah went back. Remember, she was one who abused her influence to push her maid to her husband. So now she, that's another thing I forgot to mention. When you're operating under the worldly system, oftentimes you tend to want to control. The worldly system makes us seek control because we are, again, not accepting the limitation of our humanness. We are limited. We want to control everything. And human beings are not to be controlled. I don't know if you remember one of the Sunday services where God taught us about resources and talked about human resources. Where people are not to be used or controlled. They are to be collaborated with, and they are to be nurtured. So, Sarah, the world system will make you seek control because you disregard the fact that as a human, you don't accept that you're human in limitation, and you do not surrender to the will of God. Because it's only God, like the Bible says, God touches the hearts of kings and men. Only God can really go and touch somebody. You can be nice and kind from now to tomorrow, but whatever interest a person has, whatever they want to do, they will do. Only God touches people. So, when you are removing the external factor, it becomes very important for you to recognize the fact that you cannot control the situation. Strife has already occurred and you need to seek a solution. And the first thing you need to do is you need to disempower the third party, disempower the external factor, and remove the worldly system. There was an access point. For example, what does that mean? Hagar was a maid. She got promoted to being a mate, a surrogacy partner. But in that process, she wound up a lot of strife. She became scornful and she destabilized the equilibrium of the family. So how do we now remove her as an external factor? She gets demoted back to being a maid.